So on that note, let's warm up a bit to the idea or to the topic of storytelling. I want you to first look at the picture on your screen, the picture on the right. And in the chat box, could you please tell me what emotions or what feelings does this picture arouse? What feelings does this picture arouse? How does it make you feel? Okay, sparks creativity, calming, dreaming, yes. Light, yes. Imagination, enlightenment, exactly. So these are the feelings that I want my learners to have or my viewers to have when they watch a story that I narrate. So it's for me, it's a medium to connect with my learners, to bond with my learners. So on that note, let's move on. And so here's what my presentation is going to be about. I'm right now, as I say, I'm on a mission to narrate stories to teach about language and about life. So I have split up my presentation into these two areas, language and life, where I'll be talking about what I do in each of them. And then, as most effective teachers do, I'll also be giving you a small example in the form of some glimpses into the story to understand how I bring all this together. So on that note, let me quickly go into the first section. So here I'll be talking about how I develop language, what are the challenges I face, and what is the strategy I discovered or I use to address these challenges. So we are all here today to talk about global challenges in ELT. And as I earlier mentioned, I'm from India. So obviously my context is a little India heavy, but I'm sure in the global context, a lot of us will be sharing the same global challenges. So here are what my challenges are in my context. I come from India. So when I'm situated in a metro city in India, that's Mumbai. However, what I'm talking about right now is not about the elite schools here, but about the mainstream public sector government schools. So that is the context I really want to reach out to, because that is the context I've really seen and interacted with. So in that context, most of the schools here have very large classes with a student strength of sometimes 50 to 75 and sometimes even more than that. The learners come from a multilingual background. India itself is a very, very diverse country. But Mumbai itself, again, being a metro, there are learners from different backgrounds who come into the classroom. Very basic infrastructure in the classroom. Sometimes there is a projector, sometimes even that is missing. At home, there's hardly any English speaking environment. Some of the learners are probably first generation English speakers or learners. There's a strong emphasis on grammar, and somewhere there is this misconception that knowing grammar is knowing English. And there's a raging debate always, as I think other countries would have too, between the importance of language versus STEM subjects. So somewhere language is overlooked and not developed. The love for language is not developed at school, which is why I want to do that. So this is basically my context. Can you share anything from your context, anything here which is common to your context? I would love to see something in the chat box. If there's something common, or if there's something more that you want to share from your context. Okay, some of you are saying all are common. Thank you.
I teach classes of 200 or 300 students.
Okay. I'm sure it's difficult. Thank you, Annie. Okay, so some of the same context, some of us share the same context, of course. Now, going on, what happened when I started my storytelling journey? I started my storytelling journey as recently as September 2022. I decided that it is Teachers' Day in India on 5th September. And that's when I decided to take this initiative and go to different schools where I could narrate stories face to face. Of course, the entire model has changed now, but that's how I started doing it, face to face in schools, public sector schools, basically. Now, when I went there and I started narrating stories, I used my own techniques and tried to teach as much language as I could in those interactions with the learners. However, soon I discovered a method called teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, which I would love to say that I developed it myself, but that would not be true. It's developed by a Spanish person called Blaine. And basically, this is a method which helps you to teach or to use language stories as a very powerful tool to teach language. And it's a mix of two different theories, really. So he developed this as a mix or as a blend of two different theories. One is the total physical response theory by Dr. James Asher, which is all about movement and all about language and body conversations, learning through movement, learning through physical response. So that was one aspect to this method. And the second, he was highly influenced by the comprehensible input method by Dr. Stephen Krashen. Again, here, what it means is that learners will understand English if you present it one level above what they know. So even if they don't understand all the grammar and all the vocabulary, they will still understand the language input if it's just one level above. So it's basically challenging them to understand. Along with this, it also draws upon the affective filter theory, which states that lower the affective filter or the more the children are having fun while learning, the better chance there is of them learning. And that's when I thought stories for me are the best way to bond with children. What better way for them to have fun than to listen to stories and learn through the stories as well. So basically, this method was something I used in my face-to-face approach. And at the end, I will also be sharing some links to read more about this. In the interest of time, I won't be able to discuss it too much. However, we look at the three main steps of this method, and you will do a matching task with this. I'm going to show you the three main steps, the names of the three steps, and then I'll show you a description of the three steps which you will match. So let's first look at the three steps. The first step here is to establish the meaning. Second, it goes on to ask a story. And the third one is where they read and discuss. So if these are the three headings or these are the three basic steps, can you quickly match 1, 2, 3 to A, B, C? Which one is which? I'll give you about a minute or two. Any answers? I can't see any on the chat unless there are some answers with the, okay. Okay, now I'm starting to see some answers. Thank you. All right, thank you for the responses. Some of the responses are, of course, yes, I can see most of the responses, of course, are right. And here are the answers for you. So 1C, 2A, and 3B. I'm quickly going to read this out a little. So in the first step, that's establish meaning, the story is introduced. via translation, gestures, and any multiple strategies that can be. So it's basically meant for a just understanding of the story, where the story is just introduced. The second step talks about ask a story. Here, the learners are engaged in the creation and the interaction of the story. So they go a little more into depth into the story. They reframe the story. They own the story and lend their interpretation to the story, interact with the story, etc. And the last step is read and discuss, where they go completely into detail and translate the story, read the story. Here's where they understand the grammar structures, the vocabulary, and basically look at the whole story from the language learning aspect of it. So these are the three basic steps. And like I said, in the links in the presentation, you will get to read a little more about this method. So this is how I dealt with the language learning bit of it. Now, going back to my sections, the second section that I dealt with, or I'd say that I deal with, is life. So when we listened to stories as children, I'm sure we all picked up a lot of values from the people who narrated the stories to us, whether it was our teachers, our elders, parents, siblings, whatever. So that's how we learned and formed our value systems, which have stuck with us till date. So stories then become a good medium to talk about life as well. And that's how I want to take stories outside the classroom. So again, when I'm teaching about life, there are two different aspects that I'll be talking about. One, the global issues, again, relating to the theme of the conference. And I'll be talking about a framework that I developed to help me plan my storytelling activities. So first, let's talk about the global issues in ELT today. We all know that ELT has become a melting point of sorts, and it's a place to talk about a lot of issues, not just interactional English, but it can allow you or gives you opportunity to talk about a lot of issues that connect to the real world. So some of them being the environment, which we talk about, climate action. And I'm sure you've attended the wonderful session by my colleague, Harry Waters, who spoke about the environment. There's inclusion, a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion and how we can make things or language more inclusive. There's some focus on social emotional learning, and even more so after COVID. So that's another good thing. So these are issues which are coming into the ELT classroom more and more. Intercultural awareness. Since everything has gone global, that's why we are here today, interacting with each other in different parts of the world. So which makes it necessary for learners to be aware of what's happening around the world and how to interact with people from different cultures. We can talk about poverty, inflation, human rights, the refugee situation. Again, my colleague Emily was talking about some lessons on refugee. In fact, on my website, again, as a materials writer, I had published a lesson about the refugee situation, which has to be a very sensitive lesson. When we are talking about this has to be age appropriate. It cannot be something which can add to the anxiety. And of course, the parsnips. Again, Ron was speaking about the parsnips in the first session today. And I've already added a link to where you can know more about this in the useful links on the last page of this presentation. So parsnips are basically taboo topics which are not spoken about in ELT. But I do believe very strongly that it's high time we step out of that comfort zone and address these parsnips in an age-appropriate manner, of course. In fact, there is a very recent study on gendering ELT, where I prepared an ELT lesson on menstruation, which is also something which is not spoken about very openly. So that is how that's how we need to usualize some topics and bring them into the ELT classroom. So these are some global issues. Now for these issues, and when I wanted to bring these issues into my storytelling, I developed a framework for myself, which is called the 3S framework. I've named it the 3S framework. Lots of figures here, but don't be overwhelmed. We'll be going through it. The figures are just here because I'm a big fan of graphic organizers, as it helps me to organize my thoughts. And I think it's a good tool for learners to organize their thoughts as well. So I use these organizers to organize and have things in clear in my mind. So let's look at what this framework is. So the first S is what I call the inner circle. The inner circle of a language lesson or a storytelling session, whatever you take, because storytelling is, for me, is an ELT lesson. So in the inner circle, I talk about 4 aspects: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So do these 4 headers remind you of something related to ELT? Can you please share on the chat box? Okay. So let me give you a quick clue here. Here's the word. You just need to fill in the gaps. Yes, Geha, thank you. These are the 4 skills of language. So when we talk about language learning, we usually talk about these 4 skills. A lot of other answers coming in. Yes, thank you. So this is listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which we address through our ELT lessons. Not all of them in one lesson, but at least 1 or 2 in each of the lessons is what we aim to develop. The second circle is what I began to call the outer circle. And this is the second S. Here I speak or I include vocabulary, grammar, phonology, and discourse. Again, does this remind you of something related to ELT? Great. Yes, I'm getting some answer systems, structures. So they are the systems indeed, the 4 systems of language. So basically, language is made up of the 4 skills and the 4 systems, which are the 2 S's that I'm talking about. Now, going on, I introduced a third circle, which I called the evolving circle. Now, I call it the evolving circle because it's a circle which is not fixed, which is not rigid. Unlike the earlier 2 circles, where we are talking about systems and skills, there are 4 skills and 4 systems in a language, which is more or less fixed, unless there's something which comes up later. But for now, those are the 4 areas. However, in an evolving circle, there can be less or more than 4. So let's look at this. The idea of the evolving circle was for me to bring the real world into the classroom, take English or take stories beyond the classroom and make connections with the outside world. So if that's the case, can you think of a word for a synonym for the word world, which also begins with an S? Again, here's a clue. Something similar to the word world. Yes, some answers are coming in. I'll just give it a few seconds more. Yes, excellent. So most of the responses that are coming in say it's society, and that's what it is. Now, if this is the third circle, then let's look at what it includes. Now, this time, I'm not going to tell you that. You are going to tell me what you think will go into the society circle. Can you give me some ideas in the chat box? What do you think should be? Thank you, Ron. Yes. Think about the global issues that we just spoke about earlier. Bias, interesting, yes. Yes. Excellent. Yes. So some thoughts, like I said, it's not a circle that's fixed. So it can differ from person to person and from context to context. So what I included, or the some things that I included in that circle, which I repeat again, are not fixed not something which are fixed. So diversity and inclusion, it's an opportunity to bring in inclusive language, to talk about gender differences through my story or through the session. I look for opportunities to talk about climate action through the story, or sometimes by sneaking in a little thought about that. Social emotional learning, where the learner talks about themselves, their feelings, their emotions, and also about intercultural awareness. Now, these are just 4, but as I said, please remember that these are not fixed. These are evolving, these are flexible. So there can be a lot more points, anything and everything that you want to talk about, any global issue, poverty, inflation, anything that you want to talk about in the ELT classroom can go into the circle. So that's how I look at it. So basically, you can add what you want to speak about. So that's my third circle. That's the society circle. So now when I had these ideas in mind, I sort of worked and decided that when I narrate stories, or when I have a prepare a lesson, I look at integrating these 3 S's in some form or the other into the lesson. So basically, my lesson became a good mix of these 3 circles, some skills in it, some systems, and society. Maybe not all of them, but whatever I could. Now, when I did that, that is what brought me closer to my mission of narrating stories to teach language and life lessons. So this is something I used to guide me in the process. Now, moving ahead, I also prepared a checklist for myself so that I could have a written plan of what I wanted to integrate and some points before the lesson planning process itself. So this goes even before. So if I look at a story, what is it that I can teach through a story? This is just an image of that checklist. And again, like I said, towards the end of the session today, I will be sharing a link where if you wish, you can download this framework and this checklist as well. So basically, this was a reminder for me to include some of these, and I try to include at least one of these aspects in each of my storytelling sessions or my ELT lessons. So that's about the life aspect of it. Now, as I said, an effective teacher, all good effective teachers would definitely want to show an example of what they're doing. So here's an example of a real story from the storytelling channel that I have recently started. It's called Storyland by Learning Sutra. And I use picture books here from a copyright-free site. There's a site which gives me stories which are copyright-free, and they have excellent ideas. So I start picking up books from there, and using that as a springboard, I develop my storytelling lesson or the video. Now, the latest story that I've put up there is this one. It's called My Brother's Wheelchair. So basically, when you look at the title, I want the learners to start thinking about what the story is about. Now, what I do with this, once I've chosen a story, I work with the principles of backward design in a way. And the first thing that I do, there are 3 steps that I've broken this down into again. The first step is I identify the desired result. So the first thing for me to look at is what I want the students to achieve out of this. And here my focus is more on the society circle than on the skills and the systems of it. So in the storytelling itself, I address the society circle at various points in the story. So once I've identified that result, even before they begin watching the story, I give them some questions to think about. So you can look at this as a before watch or a before reading activity. When they've basically started thinking in the direction that I want them to think, that's when they are ready for the story and for what they're going to learn through the story. So if you can look here, this is again an image, but I can quickly read out the questions. The first question is, what do you think the story is about? Do you think it's a happy or a sad story? How do you know? So they've already started applying their understanding of the pictures, of the title, and started thinking about that. And then which word is spelled incorrectly in the title of the story? So if you notice, the word wheelchair is spelled with some extra e's. So it's wheelchair. And that is what probably gives them a clue about whether the story is happy or sad, because it's the word we is supposed to be synonymous with enjoyment and fun. So basically, these are questions which I label as think to learn. So I tell them within the story, stop the story here, stop the video, think about these questions, make notes if you want to, or make mental notes, and then proceed to listening the story. The next step that I again add, So to gather evidence of learning, again, at the end of the story, I pose some questions to them again. So that is, again, my way of making them reflect upon the story so that they can take the story and make connections with the outside world around them. So the questions here are what I call as pause to ponder. So I leave them with these questions so that they are fresh in their mind when they stop the story. So here again, there are some questions which we built in. How many people do you know who use a wheelchair? Who are they? Have you seen ramps at any of the places that you've been to? Who uses these ramps? What simple changes would you make in your home or your school to make the character feel welcome? Dhruvo is the name of the character in the story. So what would you do to make Dhruvo feel welcome? And what did you learn from that story? So again, these questions are not just something that I came up with. There was a lot of back and forth here, and my colleague Lottie Galfin, who runs the Facebook group Reflecting Reality, is where I got help from, and that is my go-to source to ask questions about inclusion. So she was the one who looked into the questions, reframed them for me, so that the focus is basically it doesn't seem very condescending. So basically, the questions were reframed again and again with a lot of thought given towards how we can bring out these ideas. So this is basically pause to ponder. And again, when I design the content, I want some things to stay with them when they leave the story. So those are some, and this is something that for me is the desired learning outcome that I want out of the story. So for me, I want them to learn some inclusive language so that they know not to call a person handicapped or crippled, but call them maybe person who uses a wheelchair, maybe use person first language or a wheelchair user. So these are some little points that they have gone away with. So it's a perfect opportunity for me to tell them that the change in attitude should come from us and not from people with differences. So this is how I address these issues. Now, these three sections are something which have evolved over time. My first story had just pause to ponder. At the end, there were questions. In the second story, I came up with questions before they started listening to the story. And something that came up in the recent story is read to remember. So these are points which I address through the story. Now so that's the end of my three sections. Now, quickly, I'm just going to wrap this up by showing you a very beautiful quote, which I'm sure will resonate with you as it resonated with me. This is by the ELT stalwart, Nick Peachy. Thank you, Nick, for giving us this wonderful image and these wonderful ideas. So there are some blanks here. If you see those yellow boxes, there is a word behind each of these boxes, and I want you to guess those words. I'm going to read them out. Nick says, in a good language lesson, students should learn three things. One, something about the What's that word? You can type on the chat if you wish to. Second, something about the and third, again, something about So what are these three words? What is it that we should learn about? Okay, close answers. All right. Some interesting answers coming up. Thank you, Ron. Yes, Gehad has said yes. Okay, so let me show you what these are. So he says a good language lesson should teach students about 3 things. Something about the language, where all the pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, all of what you've said in the responses goes in. Something about the world, about real life. Somebody in the chat said real life, yes. And something about themselves as well. And this is the thought that resonates with me a lot, which is why I have come up with a similar framework in my mind, which is the 3 S's, the skills, systems, and society. And that's what helps me to narrate stories and teach lessons about language and about life. So that's the end of my presentation. Here are some useful links. You could take a picture of it right now if you want, but like I said, I'll share a link with you, and you will also be able to download a copy of this presentation. So I've mentioned some links for you to read about the TPRS method, about the total physical response, about parsnips, and about a lot more. So you can go through these at your time. And to end the session, here's my contact details. My storytelling channel is called The Storyland by Learning Sutra. The website is called Learning Sutra. If you see you can see a QR code on your screen right now, a very colorful one because I love colors. So that's something, if you scan that, you can go to my website right now. But I will also request, okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will type that out in the chat box as well. Thank you so much. And the floor is open for questions.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. I just loved it.
Thank you, Ron.
I just want to say that, I truly believe that we need to give our learners the opportunity to tell stories about themselves. And I've done this with my teenage groups. I do this with my university students, and I do it in my teacher training to teach teachers how to do it. I just posted something on my Facebook site of a storytelling because I have to say, I'm very lucky in my life that I got to meet my great-grandmother, who was 103 years old before she died. My parents from my father's side are Spanish. So she didn't speak English. She spoke to me in Spanish. And my mother's family are from Germany. They're German. And so, I got to meet my grandparents as well from the German side. This is how we learn our culture. This is how we learn who we are, where we come from, our family history, our traditions, our belief systems. Storytelling is a powerful way one generation, passes down, who they are to the next generation.
And grandparents, for that matter, are the best storytellers.
The best.
Stories narrated by your grandparents or any elders, for that matter, is something that takes you into a different world altogether.
Mm-hmm. And, I invite older people who are grandparents to come to my class and tell stories to, my learners, because that's important for them to learn how to tell stories themselves. So that post that I posted on Facebook was about what you said, because we got to get our learners to know how to do storytelling. And you said something about, teaching them storytelling. And I just want to add that we do need to teach them the skill of storytelling. And I always like to do storyboarding with them, how we storyboard that story from start to beginning, so that they get ready to tell that story in class.
Develop. So one of the lessons, I had this activity where they build a small 8-page comic and try to summarize the story within those 8 pages.
Yes, that's storyboarding. That's wonderful. Comics is a great way to do it.
Yes.
Do we have any questions for Bhavna?
I'm just going to leave this on the screen for my contact details in case somebody just asked on the chat.
Sure.
And if there are any questions, I'm right here.
Actually, there are no questions. There was only one, and Bhavna just posted or typed the link, but there are a lot of cute and lovely comments for her. Um, for example, Blanca just said that she wants to hug you both. And Annie said that Bhavna is Marigold Queen herself. And a lot
That's
of
another story altogether. So anybody who's interested in knowing what marigolds are and why I refer to them needs to go to my LinkedIn profile, and you'll see a featured video there which explains about marigolds. It's a fascinating story, trust me. You'll enjoy learning about that as well.
We do have a question there in the chat box, which says, what if the stories in a textbook are too complicated for the students? You know, it's beyond their language level. How do we work with that?
So basically, I think it's a matter of scaffolding. It's a matter of treating vocabulary, and not everything can be taught through one story. So even if you are telling a story, you need to pick out some important things or some structures or some vocabulary that you need to focus upon, and then develop the story in a way which helps you to scaffold that learning for them. Pre-teach that vocabulary so that the storytelling process is not interrupted. For me, of course, I don't tell stories through the textbook, because in schools, I sometimes feel there is not enough time. There are limitations of time and, of course, curriculum. So maybe there's not enough that can be done, which is why I created this channel. So when I started my storytelling journey, as I said, I went to certain schools to narrate the story face to face. And that was the model that I had in mind. Soon I found out that it was very difficult for schools to make time for these sessions within their timetable sometimes. And also, when I already narrated the stories, I had a feeling that students who had already listened to the story would want to probably listen to it once more. It's so the same story, if you listen to it multiple times, there are different things and different perspectives that you start looking at it from. So that's when I decided that I would record those stories and put them up on the YouTube channel, so that even if I narrate them face to face, there is something for them to go back to and listen to once again, and visit and revisit as many times as they wish to. So now I just use Zoom, record myself, then edit the video. And of course, it's been a lot of learning for me, setting up a YouTube channel, editing skills, coming up with the, those splicing, it's called splicing. Yeah, the video splicing.
All that.
So it was a CPD journey in itself for me as well.
I'm going through the same thing right now. I'm going through the same thing right now. Well,
it's fun as you learn.
It's a lot of learning.
In fact, if you look at my first story on the channel, you'll see the amount of nervousness on my face, because by that time I did not know how to edit a video. But as I went along and I learned editing, it added a lot to my confidence, because then I knew I could, edit out the bits which were not required, those uncomfortable pauses and things like that. So it's a journey within these stories itself. If you look at how they've come up on my channel, from one story to the other, you'll see me develop as a storyteller. And what I tell everybody is that if you want to narrate stories, just go for it. Don't restrict yourself. Don't stop yourself by thinking and think that you're not going to be able to do it. Just do it. For me, I was given a lot of advice that if you're working with young learners, use a lot of props. Trust me, I did not use any props. I did not use anything. But with the gestures and with the animated atmosphere in the room, there was so much excitement. So that's what I tell anybody who wants. Just take your own style, form your own technique, and go with it. As long as, just like Ron said, if you enjoy it, I'm sure your listeners, your students, your learners, whoever you're narrating it to, will enjoy it as well.
That's true. Very true. I think we have enough time for one question. And Asma, if you want to get your voice on to ask a question, you had a question? Okay, Asma?
Yes.
Well, she's not.
Thank you, Blanca. You've just shared my lesson on Freed. Yes, a lot of my lessons I've been sharing on Freed as well.
Sharing is caring. And isn't the wonderful thing about events like this where we do
It
come,
is.
meet other colleagues, share what we know. This is important. That's why I tell everybody, go to my Facebook site because you're going to learn a lot. You know, that's a lot of
Yes.
stuff there
Yes.
for
I
us
would
to
request
learn.
you to go to my YouTube channel and give me feedback on that as well. What else would you like to have within the story? Is there something else that you want me to address there? I would love to have feedback on that as well. And the lessons on my website, of course.